And now, again, I'm joined by our guest, Dr. Richard Jensen, masterful storyteller, Dick,
Thank you.
Biblical literature. You said to me just afterwards, you must get people to stop explaining Bible stories and start telling them.
I read once Garrison Keillor was asked, why do you think sermons are boring? Because he said, I think they're boring. And Keillor said, they're boring because the pastor has this wonderful story, then he takes the story, sticks it in a corner, and gives you a lecture instead. So what I have learned in the last 10 years is the power of these stories on their own. I say to pastors all the time, the stories are more important, especially the biblical stories, are more important than your comments or your insights into the stories. Tell the stories, and they have great power.
And that allows us to see ourselves in the stories.
That's right.
Jesus, the metaphor, of course, Jesus as the sower. What does all this reveal to us, as you've conveyed from the Gospel of Mark, about the cost of discipleship?
I think, first of all, it means that we need to recognize that we're very often not very good disciples. And we do. We all have these hard-hearted moments. But that's not going to capsize the boat, our boat. Jesus will continue to come after us.
What kept him going, Dick?
Jesus?
Yep.
Now that's his mission from God. That's his mission from God. To somehow convince us that he loves even us, that he loves even us.
I will keep going, he says. I will keep sowing.
Oh.
I'm reminded of an image in one of the paintings by Vincent van Gogh of the sower.
Yeah.
And of course, the metaphor is seeing religion through nature, and in his case, generating things new way of painting for Van Gogh. But the image of the sower, and we as sowers of seed.
Yeah, that of course is the next story about discipleship. Once we've been penetrated and we start to bear fruit, that fruit's going to mean that we're also going to be sowers of that seed to others, and that we do it hopefully with some of the same kind of patience Jesus has. It's so easy to get impatient with people. Sinners are really rascals, you know, and you can give up on them, but you can't. You can't. You keep throwing the seed.
There's also from Leviticus, I'm reminded of the image of, we're told when we're harvesting the field not to go near the edge, to save that for the poor.
Yeah.
In the instruction in these wonderful stories.
Very much
speaks for itself. Now take us back. Your days on Lutheran Vespers. You know all about the art of broadcasting on radio, and the connection between electronic media and biblical authenticity.
Well, that's very important, and I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Thinking in Story, and this is exactly the premise, that we have lived since the time of the printing press. We've lived in a very literate world. Prior to the printing press, we lived in an oral world. The ear was the way that you heard and understood things. Now, first with radio and even telephone, you have to include, this ear starts to come back. And with television, you have both eyes and ears. But in that old oral world, they were storytellers. And that's a lesson from that old world that we can apply in this new electronic world of communication. Ears have come back, and ears really don't do a good job of digesting really highly literate sermons. I'm sorry, I have to say that to people. I a long time ago made up a rule, that the first rule of a boring sermon, if you hear a sermon you think is boring, check and see how long the sentences are. Sentences that look perfectly fine on a piece of paper are way too long for ears. Ears need orality, so that's why I want to get back to orality, and I want to get back to these stories.
And we just have a moment left, but Dick, your passion is the three Gospels. Say a word about that.
Well, yeah, I've put those into books, preaching Matthew's Gospel, preaching Mark's Gospel, preaching Luke's Gospel, where I've tried to help pastors see how these stories are connected to other stories. That's what this sermon did. It just connected stories in Mark. And that's how the Gospels work. We have spent so much of our life dissecting these Gospels down to one story or one word even. We need to learn to see how the stories and the texts given us Sunday by Sunday connect with the wider world of Mark and the wider world with all of Scripture.
and the wider world in which we live.
Right.
You are going to Malaysia next year.
Right.
Say a word about that.
Well, I have this great opportunity to Malaysia and to Singapore and then Russia later in the year to teach people in other cultures. I want to talk to them about storytelling and see how that goes.
Master storyteller, Dr. Richard Jensen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.